What is interesting about the miracle tradition of the Gospels, the stories about Jesus' miracles, is they absolutely permeate the gospel narratives. You cannot discover a non-supernatural Jesus in the Gospels. In fact, liberals and conservatives alike accept that Jesus was renowned as a miracle worker, that the people of Jesus' day truly believed that he accomplished miracles, that he was indeed a doer of startling deeds, as Josephus describes him as. The only two options then is either Jesus believed he was doing miracles or Jesus was a great deceiver. And yet everything we read and see and hear about Jesus confirms that he was not a great deceiver. Even his critics, even those who don't believe Jesus was the Son of God or don't believe Jesus was divine, consider him to be a man of extraordinary integrity and extraordinary honesty and truthfulness. And so the idea that Jesus could have just been faking these miracles is absurd. So the people believed Jesus was a miracle worker. Jesus believed he was a miracle worker. What's the most natural conclusion? It seems to be that God was working through him. Some have claimed that ancient peoples were simply gullible, and so they saw miracles everywhere. But we simply don't see that. There are certainly miracle workers around in the first century world, but the idea that people would believe anything or that miracles were a dime a dozen just doesn't stand up under critical scrutiny. We have very few parallels, really, to Jesus' miracles in the ancient world. And what we find, interestingly, is in the gospel narratives, when Jesus does miracles, people are amazed. They're startled. They say things like, "We've never seen anything like this." If miracles were a dime a dozen, they would not be so shocked and amazed by Jesus' miracles. So the evidence strongly confirms that Jesus was a miracle worker, that Jesus claimed to be accomplishing his miracles by the power of the Spirit of God, and that those around him recognized him to be one who was filled with God's power and his Spirit and accomplished miracles.
Great religious and philosophical teachers in world history rested their claims on the authority of the ideas themselves. Now, Jesus believed his ideas carried authority, but he is unique in resting the authority of his claims on something else. He said, "Trust me because of the miracles that I perform, and trust the truth of my words because I will raise from the dead." Jesus is the only thinker in the history of the world that said you could know that what he was saying was true because he would verify it by performing miracles and eventually raising bodily from the dead. And if you have a problem with knowing what to do after you die, if you have a death problem, which 100% of us do, if you can find someone who died and came back and told us how to go to the other side, it would be a pretty good idea to listen to them.
So what's going on the cross? How can that be a once-for-all-time sacrifice for sins, past, present, and future? How is that possible? And the answer to that, paradoxically enough, is that his divine nature has to in some way be involved with what transacted on the cross. Now, I'm not going to say God died on that day, but something happened. Something happened that made that sacrifice once and for all, such that all further sacrifices are superfluous, unnecessary, defunct, obsolete, out of date, over and done with. Something mysterious happened on that cross when he died, such that finally there was an efficacious sacrifice that reconciled us to God once and for all.
Many people hear the claims of Christ and maybe even watch this video or read books defending the historicity of the Gospels. And they say, well, so what? But I think there's a great deal of significance to this material. Jesus made extraordinary claims. He claimed to be God's Messiah, God's representative. He claimed to be divine. He claimed to be the ultimate judge of all human beings. Now, either those claims are true or they're false. And every human being who hears the claims of Jesus has got to respond and either believe them or reject them. And if, according to Jesus, That decision has eternal consequences with where you will spend eternity, whether with God or in separation from God. So we're talking about matters of not just of life and death, but matters of eternity. Jesus is making an extraordinary claim, and that claim calls for a decision. A decision not to decide is a decision against Jesus ultimately. Jesus calls all to respond in faith to him.